Today I wanted to do two general lessons and then four viewer review games. Um, uh, if anyone's if anyone's new, if anyone hasn't done this so far, feel free to go to my Discord and add either a game of yours or a suggestion for an idea of a lesson. I can always use more people making suggestions and more people, and more people basically submitting games for review. It's actually super helpful to get like a bunch of them so I can kind of work ahead of time and maybe pair them to each other. But basically, I really appreciate all the material that everyone sends in. And hey, welcome Aphelion. Thank you very much for joining the stream. I guess so today I have two lessons or two kind of general concepts and four games. Aphelion is one of the games, and we will get to take a look at it. I also for every game that Aphelion sends in, he has a specific line, and I want to play through it every single time that he sends in a game. I'm kind of curious to see if it'll stick or whether that specific line we can name it after him. I'm curious about that. But every game, no, I want to do it. I'm actually very curious to see if we can create an Aphelion line. It's it's an underexplored area in the Traxler opening. I figure that it's probably something that if we do enough repetition of it, we have a reasonable shot. But anyways, just wanted to get started, and the first lesson that I wanted to do was take a look at the Queen D8 Scandinavian. The Queen D8 Scandinavian is basically, the Queen D8 Scandinavian is pretty interesting. It's a very, passive way to play the Scandinavian. Basically, Black has a, for sure. But we're gonna play through it every game that you send in. We'll play through the Aphelion line at least once. So this Queen D8, basically Queen D8 is a relatively passive move. There's no development there. Black's basically, he has an open queen file, which can later become an open rook file. But he hasn't developed anything directly, and basically he has he has difficult time, playing with this. Basically, he has a difficult time, catching up to white on tempo. His position is solid, though. I mean, there's no major issues. Black can go with straightforward development and have pretty good chances, like bishop f5, bishop g6, e6, and then development into the knights or maybe a c5 move. But basically, black should be solid, but facing off with a small time disadvantage. I have a game. It's Caruana Carlson from 2014. Whenever I think of the Queen D8 Scandinavian line, I think of this particular game. It was I think it was, if not a world championship game, I think it was a candidates game. But we can take a look at how Carlson plays this, and I think basically it should be pretty illustrative of how to best play this situation. Knight c3, Queen d8. Carlson is black, Caruana is white. d4, Knight f6. And basically here, black's just going to develop as quickly as possible and put pressure on white. The white pawn on d4 is a little bit isolated. The c3 pawn isn't defending it, so it has to be defended by pieces. And black is willing to accept, basically a knight on d7, knight forced to develop to d7, then to b6, and e6, and basically threats on the d4 pawn. I think knight e2 or bishop e3 pretty much has to come next to defend the pawn on d4. And basically, I think black is in reasonably good shape here. Basically, it's very difficult to win, against Caruana as black, but Carlson's probably one of the few people who actually has a reasonable shot at it. Here, it's an interesting situation. Basically, you have 7 pawns against 7 pawns. These pawns here are backward for the moment and isolated. And this rook, this rook is more mobile than black's rook on the a file, so that's helpful. Ideas include bishop to b4, maybe knight to b6, but basically, black will try to develop normally, white will try to develop normally, and overall, I think there's going to be some good chances for black to equalize. It's not immediately obvious that black is worse here, even though the eval is plus 0.7. There's some danger, bishop to b4, threat on king on e1, kingside castling, and basically, it's a situation which will ultimately be relatively equal. So the question is, who can come up with the better, who basically can come up with the better minor piece play. They're both going to be extremely efficient. And here's sort of a situation like, it's not really super obvious what the plans are or what established plans are going to be for black. Both sides have castled queenside. The d4 pawn is potentially a little bit loose. It can't be easily played to d5. On d5 it will get captured. So overall, I think you probably end up going with h6, g5, and try exerting some pressure on, basically supporting the center and exerting pressure on the, basically on white here. But this middle game plan feels somewhat disorganized, but at the same time, it's extremely legitimate. Knight h7 to knight g5. And basically, I think black should be able to kind of push this forward. Knight d5 looks like a good outpost. But yeah, in terms of grandmaster level plans, it's a relatively open game. This knight has a good outpost on d6. Black's going to have a good outpost on d5. White has a slightly better minor piece, but this position's actually relatively closed, and these pawns are pretty inaccessible to the bishop on g2. But yeah, I think with knight d5, black should be in a pretty good place. d4 looks takeable to me, but what am I missing? Knight takes e5 here, I would think is, I guess on knight takes e5, so on knight takes e5, b5, king takes c5, knight takes b7, forking the king and the rook. Okay, fair enough. So yeah, the rook moves to get rid of that threat. And here, basically, black will, I think, end up with a pretty solid, a solid position. King d5 looks good. Yeah, looks like a great win out of queen d8. I played through that really fast. This is a grandmaster level game, so a 4-minute analysis probably isn't quite going to do it. But I think in terms of understanding the queen to d8 line, this line, this particular game, Caruana Carlson, is kind of tough. I mean, it's basically a good showing for black to equalize then win out of this opening. In terms of minor piece development, I think white squandered his opportunity. Basically h3 g4. And white has a pawn structure that's kind of tricky, and here ultimately, basically black is able to maneuver into equality here. So I don't know. I mean, ultimately the middle game plans were not long drawn out plans. They felt very tactical and relatively quick, yeah, I guess I would say that the advantageous thing about this opening is that it never really created any weaknesses for black. When the queen goes to d8, on move 3, basically this pawn structure ends up being very solid for black. Black can develop normally, nothing's stopping him. It's basically a position that's relatively unrestricted. So black, is a little bit passive. He doesn't really have the immediate challenges that he would otherwise. Hey, welcome, Mikey. Thank you very much for joining the stream. But yeah, the ideas here I think are, basically that black can end up developing comfortably if he's willing to accept, the fact that white is basically 2 tempos ahead in development. So yeah, overall, pretty playable game. No real weaknesses. I'm wondering if, after having seen this game, I'm sort of wondering if it could be used as a method to draw. Against, like, if you're playing like in a last round game where you're trying to secure a draw against a higher rated opponent, that's a tournament situation that feels like it happens, from time to time. I'm wondering if you could play queen d8, Scandinavian, to try to secure a draw as black. Or I wonder if specifically it's a good drawing position. Yeah, thanks, Mikey. Thank you for being here. But yeah, so I guess my question is just generally, how do you, how do you exploit this? I think basically, Carlsen in his general way is very accurate. I would guess that these games are extremely close to 100% accuracy. I'm curious. I mean, this is Caruana Carlsen, so what does the engine say on them? 98.8 to 94.1. That is an exceptionally accurate game. And Carlsen is just unstoppable in this. But yeah, I guess I would say here, the ideas can include, there are multiple ideas that can be included here. But at the end of the day, it just ends up being a relatively solid position, relatively passive, and nothing, extremely, nothing extremely dangerous for Black. Black, has a two-pawn, or two-tempo discrepancy, and ultimately, walks into a. Yeah, no, totally, Mikey. I mean, it's very interesting. It is an interesting game. So yeah, I guess I would say let's go back. Let's go back here. E takes d5, queen takes d5, knight c3, queen d8. And what are the plans for white? I mean, or what are the most common things that happen? I've explained the general concept, which is you get a relatively passive opening, and an attack, and not a solidly formed plan, but more a a kind of generally good position that you're moving forward. You'll respond aggressively to any tactical opportunities that arise, but you don't really have the same ability to have a 10-move plan that you do in some types of more complicated, less open positions. Sometimes in these Grandmaster games there can be 10, 15 moves of maneuvering before someone comes up with a tactic that wins a rook pawn. Like, there's extremely, basically extremely intense plans. Here the plans are a little bit less, formed. I mean, they're playing for things like, positional improvements for multiple moves. But ultimately it ends up being a very accurate and well played open game. So after d4, Black often plays knight f6, knight f3, bishop g4 is a move, c6 is a move. C6 in the Scandinavian pairs well with queen d6. This knight's definitely going to develop to d7, and it's probably better to... is e5 ever pushed in the Scandinavian? Good question. I haven't seen it, to be completely honest. I think, yeah, I mean, there's nothing that's particularly bad about this. It's a really good question, Aphelion, and I think basically the issue with e5 is basically that, it's the beginning of the French pawn center, and the issue is in the French, basically, you're running into a situation in which there's often a... yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, e5 is, I mean, you can also play knight c3. That's the second most common move, but it's generally, the pawn on d5 is generally accepted. But the issue with e5 is that it basically undermines white's center control here. So e5, d4, f4, and basically white's going to be holding a, white's going to have a difficult time maintaining this pawn, which is overextended. It's a really good question, though. Black might be able to play f5. You could play pawn takes f6, but overall, I think queen takes d5, queen d8, and Black will be okay. So bishop takes c6, and yeah, overall, I think basically a pretty straightforward plan for Black. Try to equalize, try to disrupt white's pawn structure, and things are pretty solid. Bishop f4 looks good. So anyways, let's go back here. Let's look at some other ideas. Yeah, French advanced. Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, and you probably could transpose it into the French advance. I mean, if white plays e6 here, then d4, and it's the French advance. But the issue with the French advance is that it's not a particularly good opening, or established to sort of be somewhat weaker than mainline French or Tarrasch French. So I think it's overall an overextension. I'm sure it's literally playable. I basically leads to equality. So it's playable. I mean, you'll get a game out of it. But the issue is that that basically you're gonna be it's giving it's not the most aggressive way that white can respond, and that's why it's not played. But it's a good question. I see similar things sometimes when I'm looking at like I always wondered if you could play e5 in the Caro-Kann too, because the Caro-Kann gets really annoying with all that d5, basically d5 holding this big pawn structure. If you play d5 here, um, uh, the advanced Caro-Kann, good question. I think the mainline Caro-Kann is considered to be. I don't know if it's the most challenging attack. I know that the Caro-Kann, basically the advanced Caro-Kann can be a good attack for white. But I had always thought of knight c3, the main line, being the most aggressive way to play this. From an eval standpoint, which is not the correct metric really, but from an eval standpoint, with knight c3, you basically have more pressure here on d5 specifically, and you have earlier development. Interesting question. E5 does seem to have a better win rate though, so you're raising a good question, Bilbo, and that is very interesting. So E5 is E5 is a very interesting way to play it. I'm sure it's fine. I mean, I don't know how you would define the most challenging attack. It's a less aggressive development, but it is very playable Caro-Kann line. So yeah, maybe that is interesting. So maybe I'm just gonna look at the eval for a second because I'm curious. Here the eval is, so say e5 here, d6, or let's say d5 even, is white's best move to transpose this into the Caro-Kann advanced, or is it to take en passant on d6? My guess is probably it's better to turn it into the advance, but overall I think it's a good I think it's basically a good play for white. White's looking solid. D2 goes to d4, and if you can transpose it into a more normal opening, that realistically that probably provides you the best objective options. But yeah, thank you very much for the question, Bilbo. Overall, Queen D8 I think promises a solid game where Black is down tempo, but has no vulnerabilities. Yeah, I mean, it's I can't possibly do justice to it in a 15-minute review, but it's very interesting and generally solid. So I would say I would not steer you away from that in particular. It looks like a good idea to me. If Carlsen plays something, it's probably Carlsen plays something against another world level grandmaster. It's probably pretty safe to say that that you are that you can't go wrong by taking lines out of his opening book. Particularly this one, which was played in 2014, and people have probably forgot about it at club level. There might be good things there. After Carlsen plays an opening, it tends to get very popular for a period. But if it's 6 years old, I think you actually have an opportunity to, to capitalize. But yeah, or people have long since forgotten the world champion move from 2014. Anyways, it was a cool opening. It's a cool opening, and it's obviously playable at world level, world stage. So, interesting stuff. On to the next game, semi-Slav structures. Let's take a look. Cool. Semi-Slav structures, I think, are the most solid for Black out of d4. Basically, I was looking at this book. This is another book that I'm probably going to add to my recommendations list. You guys, asked me what, what I should do for, you guys asked me for resources in particular for what you would like me to show. There's one called Chess Structures: A Grandmaster Guide by Mauricio Rios. And that's actually an excellent book. Similar to Ideas Behind the Chess Openings, it basically reads like a book. And those it's another one. I'm probably going to add it to the middle game section of the Discord. Chess Structures: A Grandmaster Guide is a good book, and will end up it basically will end up giving you a fairly good explanation of how pawn structures are played. So yeah, Mauricio Rios, Chess Structures: A Grandmaster Guide. It's a good book, reads well. Could be one to put on your list potentially. But yeah, it explains pawn structures in each opening, and at a superficial level explains sort of what the best strategies are. I really like these books that are very conceptual over, over heavily technical, like play out in front of a board. I like the ones where you can really just read and understand the concepts more clearly. This one does a good job of that. Every chapter opens and every chapter ends with like a page of explanation for how to play against each pawn structure. And it reads like a book. Very solid stuff. But yeah, anyways, I guess what I would do here is try to transpose it into so the semi-Slav is a strong structure, and with d4, d5, c4, c6, you basically you get into the Slav, and then with an additional e6 either before or after bishop f5, you transpose into something that's the recognizable Slav. Semi-Slav structure. It's the triangle one that I'm always talking about. That's what a semi-Slav structure looks like. And yeah. So knight f6, knight f3, e6, and this is the semi-Slav defense. This pawn structure is interesting. It's just very solid. Hey, welcome FIFA boy. Thank you very much for joining the stream. But yeah, so this structure here is very good for black. You can do things like play bishop b4, you can play queen a5, you can play knight d7. The only issue that arises in this opening, and it happens if you play for this structure before you get before you play the bishop out, is basically this bishop gets locked in. That's the really problematic thing. Ideas like b6 are probably okay. Bishop a3, that can be a potential exit for the light squared bishop, but common to many queen's pawn openings, the light squared bishop runs into some restrictions. So e3, knight d7, queen c2, bishop d6, and basically I think basically black is solid, fine. White's going to end up with some initiative, but black is going to hold on to this structure. Potentially black can play d takes c4, but I don't know if relieving the tension is really that good for black here. I would do things like queen c7, I would do things like bishop e7, I would, if c5 is played, you can undermine that pretty quickly with b6. But the push, I like e5 as a push generally more than I like pawn takes c4 as a push. But yeah, overall this looks good, strong, and should lead to a solid game. We can just take a look at some lines here. I mean, I'm gonna try to opt for a line that doesn't have pawn takes c4. The main line here is pawn takes c4, so I know it's objectively fine. I know it's probably the best, but I'm sort of wondering, just in terms of like, just for the sake of looking at different plans here, what happens with e5, and can black maintain the pawn here? It looks like this leads to pretty much neutralization of that pawn. Maybe black plays knight f6, maybe black plays h6, but this center goes from being very closed to very open for black. So overall, I think that's good. I'm thinking knight f6, I'm thinking h6, and black's doing fine, no problems. What else, how should black work to make this a winning position, or a position where he has the ability to at least have some winning chances? Pawn takes c4 is the main line. I guess maybe at some point it might become necessary. The ideas here are expanding on the queen side. Black's king safety is fine, or black's king safety is good actually. So the main play in this opening is ultimately going to involve the black expanding along the queen side. A5, b4, a5, and trying to really tactically maneuver so that he gets opportunities. e4, e5, bishop g5, pawn takes, rook takes, knight e5. Black is good. No problems. I'm not sure if this knight to e5 in the main line seems pretty aggressive. Inviting this doubling of the g pawns is something that normally compromises king safety. But yeah, that's right. I mean, that's definitely a theme that can be played. Bishop d3, pawn takes c4 happens on bishop d3 frequently. You can't always make that happen, but yes, generally burning that tempo. Um, yeah. Yeah, right. I mean, yes, that's the central advance, Bilbo, and I think that's a good idea. In terms of actually getting good advantages here, um, I like the way that this position has shifted. Bishop c5 puts pressure on f2, rook d2, queen b6, and basically there's pressure getting generated on f2. The thing that I'm sort of impressed. Okay, cool. I like that idea. I'll see if Jen's interested in looking, or in creating one. But I like it a lot. Cool idea. But yeah, the move that I'm sort of wondering about, and these are main lines, right? So it's not as if I'm looking at a game where I can issue much of an improvement. But I am sort of surprised in this main line that g takes f6 is just allowed. That's that's basically a pretty aggressive way for black to play. I mean, this knight outposted on e5 is a good idea, but the pawn takes f6, opening up the king side to attack is normally something black doesn't want to do. Here it's probably okay. Knight to g6 can provide a little bit of cover. This access, the queen's not going to be able to access super easily because e5 is blocking the e4 pawn from moving, and this rook's not going to be able to make it to the king side. So again, GM level mainline opening theory, but I feel like in a practical game, this king side could become an attacking attacking target. Anyways, interesting. But yeah, so in this particular case, black castles. He doesn't play the immediate pawn takes c4. My guess is that it probably transposes pretty frequently. But yeah, it's in this case, black played pawn takes c4, a move after bishop d3 was played. To be fair, I don't really think it matters that much. It's not as if on castles c5 somehow becomes a good move. Or that this bishop is going to move. I mean, pawn takes c4 threatening this bishop on d3 is still going to be there. So that transposition plays out the same. But I think Bilbo makes a really good point. Often in this line, black can get an extra tempo by threatening the rook or threatening the bishop with pawn takes c4. That does make e4 easier to play. That does kind of establish better center control for white. But on I don't know, b5 or knight b6, you're sort of moving away from the part of the game where the center is the most important. And you're starting to move into the part of the game where, black's attacks are going to be based off of a queenside pawn expansion. Probably b5 or a5, b4. This is where black's play is. Still sort of impressed that black in the main line feels so confident with these pawns and double isolated f-pawns. But I guess that's right. I mean, I guess that the king side attacks really are inaccessible. It just looks so dangerous, like knight h4, knight a5. But I'm sure black can manage, and I sort of see the mobility issues, so that makes sense. Anyways, ways to advance this: pawn takes c4, b5, bishop b2. And basically here, I think black's just, black's opened the situation a lot. And the target of this attack is going to be advancement on the queen side. I think this is going to be pretty much common to all these Slav structures. Basically, with these Slav structures, what you're going for is an expansion on the queen side. It can happen now or it can happen a few moves from now. But pawn takes c4, bishop takes c4, b5, a5, b4. That's where the play generally is in this opening. I can't really think of one where black ends up attacking aggressively on the king side. The play is mainly on the queen side, and one of the main concepts in this opening is how quickly the light-scored bishop can be activated. One of the real shortcomings for... Hey, thank you very much for the follow, Chessmaster. Appreciate it. But yeah, bishop to b7, knight to b6, and I think generally things are good for black over white. It's a solid game, but black's I think getting closer and closer to securing equality. But the advancements here I think are the good idea, and with that in mind, I think you can exert some pressure on the pieces with these queenside pawn advances. Overall, super interesting. Interesting structures, very common one, solid for black. In the absence of a larger plan, just forming this pawn structure for black puts you in a position where you're not easily attacked. I mean, you're gonna have to learn how to maneuver, make efficient maneuverings and learn how to attack with pawns on the queen side. But this can provide a very good guideline in terms of pawn structure for something that's not super attackable. You always have to worry about your light squared bishop. But overall here, I think you're in a good place with this pawn structure. It's one of the more solid ones that black can play. Very sound, played at very high levels, and deals with many issues that black can potentially face. Ideas with pawn takes c4, b5 are common. Some lines have either e5 or c5 as pushes, but this pawn structure can be a good general setup. And once you end up forming this, you can form your next ideas and remainder of the plan on the fly based on the exact situation. But yeah, those are the semi-Slav structures. They're interesting, and interesting idea. I hope this kind of superficial analysis is helpful. Like, it's just tough to go through everything. I didn't get close. But if you can form that triangle pawn structure, at say 1500 level, it's hard to go wrong with this. This is just generally solid, and forward-looking plans can involve pawn takes c4 once the bishop's played to d3, b5, and a5, and black can get good aggressive attacks on the queen side. Sometimes with the rook on c8 facing the queen as well. That's one of the things that can happen. But yeah, really interesting openings, good stuff, and on to the game analysis. Cool. And one other thing, just from that, this book that I was looking at, Chess Structures: A Grandmaster Guide, I'm gonna add that to my list of resources in the Discord. That's one that I really like. It has very good, readable concepts based on pawn structure. And if you know the concepts behind a particular pawn structure, that can be super helpful if you're able to apply that to games where you're not necessarily familiar with the opening theory. You know that this pawn structure involves this, so you should probably think about plans where that particular pawn structure that are intuitive and generally good within that particular pawn structure. Nothing is ever certain in chess, but it can provide a very good guideline for what type of strategic plan might be the most efficiently executed in the middle game. Cool. Awesome. This game was sent, I think, by Tapas, right? So let's take it from black's perspective. Let's take a look. Cool. So d4 is interesting. Smith-Morra Gambit. Smith-Morra, I think is not. It's one of those ones that's sort of, is this really super playable? It's a tough one. I think basically it allows black to develop quickly and against the queen on d4, or usually against the queen on d4, sometimes knight f3 transposition. But Smith-Morra games are questionable for white. Cool, thanks, Mikey. Thank you for sending that. I just want to make sure. Yeah, totally. That's the recommended chess resources page. And I was gonna take a look at that and add that to the list. But I think the ones on there are all very helpful. You certainly can't go wrong, and I think you are gonna see efficient returns on your time using those particular resources. That's my recommendation there. But yeah, they're good stuff generally. But I want to add this Chess Structures Guide to that list because I think that book might be very helpful. Yeah, no, for sure. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for highlighting that, Mikey. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I mean, it's sort of difficult to. Yeah, of course, Mikey. No, thank you. Thank you for uh, linking to it, and thank you for making it more accessible. But yeah, so here, in terms of things for black, I think white's already black is already equalized here, technically speaking, right? I mean the eval's at 0. Um, uh, the game's basically out of opening theory, and black has kind of a good opportunity to develop quickly against a white side that hasn't developed virtually at all. So I don't know. This is a good time to form a plan on this strategy. So I'm thinking Queen B6. Other ideas include Rook C8, Knight F6, G6. But I think basically black should be black should be in a pretty good situation. I would be happier playing black's side here. The position says equality, but it's much clearer what to do with the pieces, or with the minor pieces as black than it is to do with the pieces as white. So I'm thinking Rook C8 should be pretty good intuitive advancing move. That's not a plan. That's just a move. But yeah, no, hey, it's named after you, Aphelion. That's why you play it. If you have an opening named after you, you get to play it, regardless of how sound or unsound it is. But yeah, so G6, Bishop G7, Knight F6. But I think the plans here are all developing moves that black will probably want to play here. But plans, I think black may want to counter white in the center. I'm sort of liking E5 and F5 paired as a bigger strategy. I think if you play E5 and then like Queen C8 and then F5, black's really putting a lot of pressure on the center. You can open up the center a little bit because attacking lines are not that available on the king side, assuming that there's king side castling. But I'm looking at like E5, Knight F3, Queen C8, and then F5 coming. I think that could be a middle game plan that could be helpful for black here. That seems correct. I don't know if you'd want to pair that with Bishop E7 or Knight E7. Or further development before playing F5. But overall, I think this should be pretty good for black. So yeah, let's keep going. Rook C8, Bishop E7, and yeah, black's developing in a straightforward way. White is as well. And here, I think you are going to have some pressure on knight, on that queen on C2. But I'm thinking a better way to do it might be queen to B6. Queen to b6 has a few benefits, although it does run into knight c4. I was thinking queen b6 because that basically prevents castling queenside for black. But castling queenside for black actually isn't that good for black, or castling queenside for white. Castling queenside for white probably isn't that good an idea. I think you can play knight to d4 and then knight takes and then pawn takes, and you're exerting pressure on c3. That could be the way to attack the queen here. But yeah, overall castles f5, bishop takes f5, and I think black should be in pretty solid shape. His development is better. This rook is on a great file, yeah, I think it's not a time to be overly basically to make superficial threats. I think knight b4 is a little bit of a superficial threat here, so I would sort of steer away from it. But I think something like f5 could be good. F5, pawn takes f5, bishop takes f5, and you have this bishop in a very natural position, and you're rapidly gaining both the center and space into white territory. So I think f5 looks pretty solid. Castles is also good. Castles is a straightforward developing move. F5, pawn takes, bishop takes, black is fine. But yeah, I think those are better moves. Knight b4 is an idea, and definitely a move that could fit well into a later part of this game, a part of this game where you have full development and the king has already castled. But here I think it's just dealt with a little bit too easily. The queen goes to d1, and then the pawn is threatening the c3 pawn's threatening the knight, and you have to move the knight basically right back to where it was. So that is sort of a this trait or this sequence of moves is not particularly good for black. I think this offers black an improvement. Um, just in general, if you make a move that you see yourself immediately unmaking, that generally is a loss of a tempo, right? So if we count the tempos here, it's black to move, and the knight goes there, the queen goes there, the knight moves back either to c6 or to a6. But with the idea, or with the pieces unmoved, black has lost a tempo. So like you have this position basically, and then after it you have this position, except that the difference is now it's white's turn. So it's a loss of a tempo net in that in that situation in which you're moving back and forth. But yeah, I would castle and play f5. I think that's probably the best idea. Castling here, maybe rook d1. Black is fine. Knight to d4. Overall, I think this ends up playing out pretty well for black. Black has developed effectively, and with a continued developing move, I think you're in good shape. Hey, welcome, Chessmaster Rishi. Thank you very much for joining the stream. But castle's f5 here, and I like black's position a lot actually. But this I think is an inefficient use of tempo. Rook b8, awesome. Queen takes a7 is basically a game-losing blunder, or should be. And I think black just needs to close out from here, but I think he will successfully. And yeah, with the extra pieces and the queen facing the rook, black wins comfortably. So overall, great game. It was great the way that you managed to trap the queen over on the queen side there. This was excellent. I think you played in an intuitive way. You got all the quick development, which is very important. Quick development is very important in general. Fundamentally good, never a problem. I mean, problems don't occur because you were too developed. But yeah, the only misstep in this game, I think, really, is this knight b4 move. And I think this is just kind of a mindset thing. Like you have to kind of think both about the move, which offers an attack and a disruption on the queen, and a cool looking pin. But if white responds accurately to what is a cool looking pin, you just have to move the knight immediately back to where it was, and in that trade you've lost the tempo. So knight to b4, the queen has to move, and then the knight has to move either to c6 or a6, but something. That's the that's the issue here. Queen b3, knight a6, and but I think really that's the only misstep for black this game. Knight c5 was great. Queen b4 is the only move I think that saves white's queen, and white doesn't play it. He plays rook to a8, and the queen is the queen's basically lost. So that's awesome. Great game. I think you really played well. You got very good development, and that was very important. Basically the fact that you were so well developed with minor pieces on the queen side meant that you could trap the queen, and that was the important part of winning this game. The only move is this knight b4. I just think that if you play it, it's a cool pin, but it's just it's just dealt with too easily. And black and white benefits from having you move the pieces back to pretty much exactly where they were. But yeah, knight c6, you should basically be fine as you're still fine as black, of course. Like this situation is just fine. Queen takes b7 is a mistake, and queen takes a7 is a big mistake. And you use your superior development to exploit those errors. Then there may be inefficiencies later in this game, but overall I think you're really in a good place, and you end up with some basically strong positioning here. This should be this should be a relatively easy endgame to win. But overall, great game. These queen moves in the Smith-Morra felt excessive, and you capitalized by developing more quickly. That's what you're supposed to do. If your opponent plays anti-fundamental moves like excessive queen moves or excessive pawn moves, just develop your pieces in a normal fashion, and your opponent will be will struggle in terms of catching up with your development. But yeah, good stuff, good games, and thank you very much for sending the game, Tapas. Please keep sending them; it's super helpful. Our next open slots are on May 14th, and I'm hoping that a bunch of people will send either ideas for lessons or games of theirs in. And yeah, I really just appreciate you sending it in and contributing ideas to the stream. Thanks a lot for that, Tapas, and yeah, hope to see more games from you. Cool. On to the next game. This is the Reels game. The Reel is playing as white. And we'll take a look. Cool. So the Reel plays the Italian game. That's what I play. Yeah, no, thank you, Tapas. No, thank you for sending the game, and I hope that sort of makes sense. I mean, basically, the fact that you make a move and then move back makes it an extra move for you, which makes it basically white's turn in a similar position versus black's turn in a similar position in that game. I think your overall fundamentals were great. I think your tactics were good. It was great tactic winning the queen. It's what won the game. But yeah, that tempo. I hope that explanation was helpful. But thank you very much for sending the game. Please keep sending them, and yeah, really appreciate you being here. But yeah, so white plays the Italian game. Black plays the Hungarian defense, which is bishop to e7. And overall, relatively solid. Bishop e7 is particularly unchallenging for white. With bishop to c5. Things should basically be safe things basically are not under stress for white. White can play normal developing moves like d3, knight c3, bishop e3, and overall I think white will end up in a relatively good position. Bishop e7 is just a little bit quiet. Black is still obviously completely fine, and there's a whole game to be played, but it is a quiet opening move. The main move is bishop c5. Which I think will offer a better eval, and is about 20 times as popular, something like that, 15 times as popular. So anyways, bishop e7 is a quiet response, not a bad one, but just quiet, somewhat unchallenging. d6 after bishop e7, this bishop is now restricted to this diagonal. I think that bishop in general is more powerful and has more squares to move to on this diagonal. It also supports the center on c5 and doesn't support the center on e7. But yeah, I think white's just going to push here. d4, bishop g4, bishop e3. And, it's a game. This is sort of tactically complicated. h3 probably, bishop takes f3, queen takes f3. It's going to end up being in a pretty good situation, I think, for white. It's just there's black... white has complete center control, somewhat of a space advantage. These pawns are equal, but this e4 pawn faces off favorably against this d6 pawn. Overall, white's position is good. I don't know how he's going to mount a kingside attack, but I think that's probably the larger strategy here. In this game, I think probably what's going to happen, or what a reasonable plan here is after bishop somewhere, either like bishop d7, play king h2, you play g4, play like rook g1, and start the attack. Try to maintain. It's double-edged, and it's a double-edged strategy to start playing moves like g4 post castling here. But I think overall it should be good. So yeah, I guess I would say h3 followed by g4, and you're in a pretty good situation as white. But I like advancing on the king side as an overall strategy, even if it is double-edged. I think your king can have relatively good king safety on h2, and I think that will be helpful there. So yeah, bishop e6, d5, and that's good. So bishop e6 is a pretty big error. I mean, it allows this d5 fork, and then you're up a piece as white. So good stuff. You're going to have to be very careful here. This queen is doing some aggressive things. You have to make sure that you come up with an accurate response. And overall here, I think white ends up with a good, relatively quick win. In terms of looking at this is a really good game, really interesting game, and I think we can come up with some good opening theory related concepts for this one. Rook e1 is good, capturing the the semi-open file. d4, bishop to g5, and then yeah, I mean here I guess I would say d5 is probably the best. d5 maybe on knight to a5, bishop b5. Sort of curious about this one because this knight doesn't want to go back to b8 and undevelop, right? So it probably plays to knight a5, and then after knight a5, the bishop goes to all the way to f1. They're saying, which sort of makes sense. You would want to play it to e2, but the pawn on e4 hangs. What's interesting is actually the engine is saying that knight b8, which basically gives black a second try at development, knight to d7 and then knight to b6. Is a better way to play this than knight a5. That's sort of interesting. I just figure like an undeveloping move that's probably generally bad, but if you play knight to a5 here, I guess it gets stuck and it's not. Knight to d7 is a more healthy development and more likely to be used in the rest of the game than c5 than the knight on a5 here. Interesting. Cool. So bishop e3, h5, h3, bishop e6, and here d5. Basically, I think there's not really much in terms of improvements for white. You played it accurately. I don't see any issues with the moves that you played, and then you play you run accurate play into a hung piece. Let's figure out this. This bishop e3 is an error, I guess, but this is just a tactical focus thing. If you play bishop to e3, the pawn hangs on e4. And there's no effective discovery for the bishop. You could play like h6 and try to get doubled isolated pawns, but at the end of the day, this is probably just sort of bad for white. I guess I would play h3. I might play d5, but bishop e3 and bishop e3 is a totally understandable move. I mean, you're developing pieces, and that's a great idea. I would play maybe bishop to g5. But overall here, I think white's going to end up with a good development, solid position, and ability to attack on the king side. So it's a good game. The real it shows this basically solid play in the Italian game. I like these tactics. Queen f6 was really aggressive by him, but interesting. But yeah, let's look at this. So bishop e7 is an unchallenging move. It's this Hungarian defense. It's solid, but not challenging. It will offer white a small positional advantage into the middle game. Bishop c5 is a more aggressive way to play. Not saying that means that bishop e7 is unplayable, but it's sort of not. It doesn't offer the same level of challenge for white. Bishop e3 hangs e4. That was the only error in this game. H3 makes sense, D5 makes sense, and you're golden basically. There's not really much of a an advancement opportunity. You're good here. So what should you do? I don't think there's much. This is a very reasonable Italian game. Maybe I'll spend 2 minutes just looking at lines in the Italian game against the Hungarian defense. But I think it's a very solid game, the real, at the end of the day. So I don't have a whole lot to offer in terms of improvement. But it is still a great game to look at because the Hungarian defense is a way the black can play the Italian game, and coming up with a good response to it is important. C3 is castle's what was played, and then C3 is played here. The engine is basically saying, and the opening book is implying, that you can play d4 pretty comfortably here. If you're playing c3 to play d4, partially that's good because you're retaking. If pawn takes d4, then pawn takes d4, and you have a full center. But after castles, knight f6, d3, castles. Basically, I think white's going to be, comfortable and fine. Rook to e1, bishop to b3, knight to c3. It's just a better center for white. This is why I like the Italian game. It happens a lot where white just ends up with a better center and better, plenty of attacks, no vulnerabilities, and better center. That's why I lean towards playing the Italian game in general. But Yeah, bishop c4, d6 is an idea, bishop e7 is an idea. And I think basically white's going to end up in a pretty good place here. I think ideas maybe h4, knight g5, but overall here I think you're in, you're in a solid place, and it turns into a game, and then you play more efficient moves and better tactics than your opponent. Your opponent plays bishop h6, bishop e6, and the game sort of ends. I also just sort of wanted to look at the Evans Gambit for a second. Evans Gambit is always interesting. B4, bishop takes b4, and one, just because it's a very tangible thing that you can talk about. This bishop to b6 is never a good move in the Evans Gambit. This will just lead to a worse position for black. Bishop takes c4 bishop takes b4 is the way to play the Evans Gambit. It's just, if you look at the engine lines, it's pretty clear that his move is better. Yeah, I think that's right. You can play d4 on bishop e7. D4 is the #1 move here, most common. It's sort of interesting, as a general concept, because d4 basically, will make it so that you only have one pawn in the center. I think overall that's fine, and probably this is the best move objectively for white. But if you like the d4 e4 structure in the center, d4 sort of neutralizes that. On d4 you can play knight takes, pawn takes, and basically white is sort of white is basically fine. This pawn faces off well against this pawn. I've talked about this before, but basically if you have a pawn on the 4th rank and your opponent has a pawn on the 2nd or 3rd rank, you have a space advantage because the pawn can't move to d5 because you'd take it. So these two pawns face off favorably against each other. That's an important component of this position. But with d4, this is a good position for white. D4 I think probably is objectively the best. Better than castles. Or sorry, before I was just looking before d4. I think d4 probably is objectively the best move here. I think the engine says it is. But with d4, pawn takes d4, knight takes d4. White's pawn structure. White's not going to have that big d4 e4 center pawns. It's still the best move, but just something to consider when playing d4. It is the best move though, and you should probably play it. But that's just one component of that position to recognize. Cool. Very interesting. Thank you for sending the game, the reel. And it's on to Aphelions game. And before we start Aphelions game, every game Aphelion sends to me, we're going to look at Aphelions opening line. Aphelions opening line is this. It comes out of the Traxler. It's at this point an opening line that is not not well explored. But just so we all know it, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, knight f6, and then the key component. So knight to g5, and let's take it from black's perspective. Knight to g5 is basically the knight attack against the two knights defense, and what makes it a Traxler is not playing d5, which is the most common move here. d5 is the most common by about 10 times. What makes it the Traxler open is bishop to c5. Yes, I do. So good question, Aphelion. So bishop c5, knight to f7, bishop takes f2, king f1, queen e7, knight takes, e5 or d5, pawn takes, knight to d4, and here basically after c3, white shows an advantage. So this is basically, but matching king f1 with bishop c4 with c3 is the Aphelion line of the Traxler opening. And here, I just want to go through it one more time from white's perspective. Bishop c5 is what defines it as the Traxler. Knight takes f7, bishop takes f2, king to f1, knight takes h8. And here, basically white has never really lost the initiative. And with d6 paired with c3, white ends up in a situation where he's up about 2 pawns, 2.5 pawns. This is the Aphelion line of the Traxler opening, and every time Aphelion sends this game in, this notation will be played, and yeah, I think that's the kind of way that we can call it the Aphelion attack from now on. But this is that opening. It ends up with a white advantage against Traxler theory, and it had been previously unnamed. Now it's the Aphelion opening. All right, thank you for sending the game, Aphelion. Let's go on to the game that you sent. Here it is. Yeah. Well, no, I mean, you invented it. I think it's a great. I think, well, you know, I'm interested in trying things, and I think basically if we go through that opening theory line, maybe it'll catch on. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But I'm sort of curious to see what will happen. This is a game that Aphelion has sent, and let's take a look. All right. So here, let's take it to analysis mode. You know, interesting game, very accurate, and yeah, let's see what's going on here. Wing Gambit. Okay, the Wing Gambit actually is one of the the Wing Gambit is a okay, yeah, no worries, Aphelion. Yeah, no, it's all good. But yeah, we haven't actually gone over the Wing Gambit theory. Wing Gambit theory is kind of interesting. With b4, c takes b4, a3, and then on b takes a3, usually, I think of it as always being bishop takes a3. The engine says knight takes a3. But overall, this, you know, this seems like a, you know, this ends up being a position in which white is actually, you know, equal or slightly better. So bishop takes a3 or knight takes a3 are the most common moves here. The Wing Gambit is interesting. You know, you basically have this open queen side. You have this extremely mobile rook on the a file. And you can play knight f3, bishop c4, d3. And generally, you know, white's going to be in a pretty good place. You know, his development's going to be faster. His mobility's going to be better. And with d6, d4, knight f6, bishop d3, white's just comfortable. You know, this is a better, you know, this is a better position for white positionally. You know, the question is whether it's or not it's worth the sacrificed pawn. But if black takes all the way down to e3, it's very close. So yeah, an interesting gambit for sure. And not one that I think can be played, you know, at a reasonably high level. This is not the Stafford gambit. It's much better than that. White gets this kind of it's almost like a Grunfeld-esque type pawn structure, but he gets open lines and the ability to develop quickly. He's sacrificed a pawn, but he has the great rook and a great queenside you know, space advantage, and he can play things like bishop c4, d5, knight f3, and yeah, it's an interesting position. Here in the opening book, knight f3 is the most common move. I just want to see if I guess there's probably not that many Wing Gambit games. You know, c takes b4 is the most common, a3 is the most common. Black normally responds d5 here. But here's basically the point where it sort of becomes a game. I mean, there's multiple acceptable moves here, of which knight c6 is one of them. Moves are d5, e6, b takes a3, knight to c6, e5, and overall, you know, black will probably try to you know, basically hold on or trade these two pawns for each other. If black can trade these two pawns, then he's secured a pawn advantage out of the opening, and that's the point of the gambit. Yeah, no, for sure. That makes sense. You know, objectively, the Wing Gambit probably isn't as good as some other things, but the Wing Gambit is actually a gambit that is pretty playable. You know, you really can get good games out of it. It's not one of the if black takes all the way, you end up with relative equality, and overall, I think it's a pretty good, you know, general situation. So yeah, I really like, you know, I like it as an idea. I definitely think as a particular thing to have in your repertoire if you need to play something that is not a main line. I think it's a pretty good one as they go. But yeah, let's look at this. So b4, pawn takes, a3, and here, you know, white's, I think, in pretty good, you know, this is the gambit. You know, d4 here, and white's got an initiative, you know, relative equality, maybe slightly better, plus equals. But yeah, this is a very playable gambit. To be fair, White will have to come up with big attacks and be able to regain that pawn that he sacrificed. But here he might have a good opportunity to do it. I mean, the rook is powerful, the queen side is open, and White has development initiative. So, c4, b4. This position is simplifying. White is attacking on the. Yeah, no. I think your position is fine. I mean, your engine's saying equals. You have a huge space advantage on the queen side. This a pawn is vulnerable. Maybe with things like rook a3, queen a2, you could be in a good shape here. But yeah, I think d5 is probably a little bit questionable. I think d5 allows c5, and then White has a connected passed pawn. I'm just gonna go through this to look for errors, but I think this is all basically right. Yeah, this all looks pretty accurate. d5 is an error though. d5, c5, and White White definitely has an advantage, and a connected passed pawn on a queen side where he has all the space. He has a lot of space and the ability to make good attempts to push it forward. Thematically, I would be a little bit careful of moving the pawn to c6 too early. I think you want to have all your pieces involved in the attack before playing c6. But you can just hold it here. You basically have this d4 c5 structure, and that's looking pretty solid. Knight takes, and overall, I like White's position. You are going to have to come up with careful responses to this kingside attack, though. White is forming this kingside attack as quickly as possible. Here I would probably look at things like bishop f1, knight e4. But yeah, I like it. I like it as White. I'm wondering if you could slow down this attack a little bit, though. Like bishop f1. Bishop f1 covers things more quickly, I think. But it's a little bit defensive. Engine is suggesting bishop f1. I'm sure objectively that's slightly better. But bishop to c4 is okay. You just are going to have to really be careful and come up with tactically resourceful defense. Rook takes, knight e4. I guess I don't know. This is a little bit tricky. I don't dislike knight e4. It looks okay. It must have a tactical refutation, which is queen g6, threatening mate and this knight at once. Yeah. Yeah. No. This is a tactic. This is a tactics problem. Yeah. I think this is. You've got a very good and interesting game here. But knight to g4 and queen to g6, and this queen is threatening both to take this knight, and that knight is pinned, and the g2 square is getting threatened. So that does end up losing a piece, unfortunately. Knight takes g2 is not correct. Queen g6 was correct. But this will still, I think, end up with White in a fairly good position. We're getting into sort of a tactical mess here. The best move here is now knight e5, not taking the knight that's hanging. It's getting pretty crazy. Now bishop a4, but it's really a tactical, position. In terms of improving this position, I would look at wing gambit is fine. It's not a bad opening. It's good for a gambit. c5 was correct. Really good idea. Okay, knight takes f6 is, I don't know, fine. I might also look at knight. I'm curious about the eval on knight to g3. Bad. Okay. Interesting. Or like, what if you do knight to e5 here? Interesting. Okay. Yeah, knight to e5 is better. Knight to e5 secures an outpost. Basically here, there's no. I don't really think you're that pressured to move the knight on e4. You have it defended. On bishop takes and knight takes, you can play queen takes. So knight e5, I think captures. I think here is probably a thematic concept of not getting too scared of an attack that your opponent hasn't formed yet. Knight e5 is a good outpost. The engine knight takes f6 I think was the preferred engine line, but knight e5 I like. Knight e5, yeah. I mean, because the thing is like, you only have so many moves in your game. So if you spend a move responding to a threat that isn't necessary, you've spent a defensive move where an active and potentially attacking move could have been played. So knight e5 improves the knight. The knight is better and has more control over the black position on e5 than it does on f3. I mean f3 it's basically stuck there, but on e5 it has more advanced positions. So I'd say knight e5 is good. This looks good, and black basically is looking to post his knight on d5. d5 is going to be a powerful outpost for that knight. Threatens a lot of squares, threatens the rook in an annoying way, which will probably end up leaving the d4 pawn undefended. But yeah, I would say knight to d5 is tricky. Knight to e5 is a straightforward improvement of the knight. But yeah, preventing knight d5 makes sense. You would have to follow it up accurately. But knight takes d5, bishop takes there, and bishop there maybe. This looks fine for white. The engine is being very nitpicky and saying bishop h7, king h8, then bishop e4. That is very compy, very funny engine-related move, but it actually is. That's actually a really funny example of the engine. So bishop e4 was my idea, but the engine prefers bishop to h7, king h8, bishop e4 just to make the king just a little bit worse on h8. It's so correct, but it's like, who would even think of that? The king is just a little bit worse on h8, so that's the strategy that you should do. But yeah, that's actually really funny. Knight takes, bishop e4, things are good. Here in terms of improvements, there's really just this tactical one. I think this is it's just a tactical miss. I think with strategic or with enough tactical training, you would be more likely to see something like this. Queen g6. The engine's been talking about bishop f1 for quite a while. That's objectively right. I mean, basically supports your king side, adds a defensive piece in a place where you could potentially use one. But yeah, here, knight to e4 and then queen to g6, and that's not what happened in the game, but this is a threat that is going to cause white a lot of difficult problems. Yeah, bishop f1, it is sort of a tough move to see. I mean, undeveloping pieces is always kind of difficult to do, or difficult to be disciplined enough to undevelop a piece, right? I mean, it's like you basically are repositioning it to somewhere where it started, so all of its movement to that point has been kind of inefficient, I guess. But I would say bishop f1, and yeah, bishop f1 gives you better control of the white squares here, and on g3 I think you should be pretty good. Bishop f1, g3, white should be fine. Knight e4 is just a tactical miss. They always, that's not an easy one to see. Queen g6 is a tricky, complicated tactic using both a pin and a double attack. Yeah, it's just a tactical oversight. Overall, I think it's a really good and interesting game. It basically shows the wing gambit is not objectively that bad. I mean, with it accepted, it's equality or plus equals for white. That's really pretty good for a gambit. White capitalizes and gets good development. c5 was correct. And then I think really, and then I do think that you could improve on knight to d2, knight to e5, moving the pieces forward, as opposed to playing knight to d2, bringing a piece that doesn't need to move backward. Just as a general strategic concept, move the pieces forward. Yeah. Knight e4 is yeah, knight e4 is just a tactical oversight. Happened to all of us, from time to time, and I think good job. This I wouldn't have resigned here, to be completely honest. I think you've still got some play. It's pretty obviously black's up, but I don't know. Okay, for sure. Yeah, no, I mean, look, the thing is, you can beat, masters are very beatable. You can, you will have games where, if you have the correct tactical backing, you can really, capitalize on errors that they make. This one, this guy played pretty well. I think white's better here, but you never really, you had you had a difficult position where you had the initiative. But I do think that with tactics training, you basically can maintain equality here. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think you're in pretty good, it's a pretty good game. Thank you for sending it. The two moves that I take a look at are, the theory behind why you play knight e5 versus knight d2, and also this this knight e4 with the queen g6 oversight. That's the difference. That's why I think that's better for basically those are two improvements for white. And overall, thank you very much for sending the game, Aphelion. Very interesting as always. I liked being able to show off the wing gambit. We haven't taken a look at that, but my takeaway is basically, as gambits go, wing gambit is one that offers white better chances for equality than some of the more out there gambits. This is good stuff. Very interesting. No, thank you very much for sending it, Aphelion. Please keep sending stuff. Every game you send in, we'll go through the Aphelion line at least once. I'll make that. I'll see if that catches on. But yeah, on to the next game. On to the last one of the night. This is Sorley's game. Let's take a look. Sorley versus Camillo. Sorry, maybe I didn't parse the thing. Okay. Well, then we'll go through it extra, I guess. We'll go through it at least twice in that case, Aphelion. Probably more than twice. Yes. I'm just gonna keep doing it until I'm just gonna keep doing it till it sticks. That'll work. But yeah, I'm really curious. That's the Aphelion line of that opening. If anyone saw it, we're gonna play through it. It'll be on the VOD forever at least. So definitely keep that in mind. That is the Aphelion line of the Traxler. Okay. So white wins this game. And I think this is played from black's perspective. I think this is Pravilo's game, right? I forget who sent it to me, to be completely honest. But I think maybe Pravilo. Pravilo is playing against the London Opening. London Opening is shown by computer analysis at this point to be one of the best openings. And here, I think this is a fine response. I'm always a little bit skeptical of playing knight to c6 in a queen's pawn game. The issue with the knight to c6 is that there are many defensive resources that can be, provided with c6, and there's many attacking resources that can be provided with c5, and knight to c6 blocks both of them off. I think that, objectively, probably c6, c5, and knight to d7 is a better opening structure for black, but it's anti-fundamental that the quick development would not be the best move here. I completely understand why you would go with something else there. Play like knight f6, knight d7, c6, c5, and overall, I think that's better. Knight c6 is way down the list. I'm sort of curious to see if it passes that, my opening threshold test. It looks like here it goes from about 0.12 to about 0.5. So it's a shift of 0.4 against you or so. And it's pretty far down the list in terms of openings that are getting played. So it's 94 out of maybe 9,400. So it's, like a 1.5% possibility. It's right on the verge of what is and is not playable using that opening repertoire concept that I was talking about yesterday. Cool. This is all good. And here e6 and then bishop b4. I think you're just generally comfortable as black. This in terms of errors that white made here, bishop d7 leads to at least knight takes d5. So that's a move, this is just tactical vision. Like, knight takes d5 is available for white here. And even on e5, white's still going to get a pawn up. So bishop d7, I think, is something that black can improve on. Otherwise here, I think it sort of makes sense. But I would take bishop d7 out of your opening. If that's part of your opening repertoire, I'd take it out because that pawn on d5 is hanging. Bishop takes, e6. Basically, I think black's pretty good. I mean, minus 0.4. Solid. Knight f5 here, though. Pawn takes g5 is, it's difficult for a number of reasons. Here, knight to f5 is actually a really good outpost for that knight. So there's two reasons why. So I want to take this position after white's g5 and analyze exactly why knight f5 is a better continuation. So on knight f5, this knight is now here. On this square, this knight controls a lot of squares for white. It also can't be threatened by any white knights. Really any pieces from white. The rook can't take it. The knight can't really threaten it very effectively. You can play like pawn takes f6, and maybe queen g7. But overall, I think basically black is going to be in a pretty strong general position here. It's just a strong outpost. It's sort of the definition of a centralized outpost for the knight, and a particularly non-attackable one. That's worth a lot, to be honest. So in this situation where you play knight to f5, your attacking plans can involve h6. They can involve opening up the rook file for your rook, and then you can start moving the rooks down. But overall, I think it's good for black. Just securing this outpost has value by itself. So getting your knight there is a move that should be recognizable as good. Among other things, this knight is stuck on the rim. They say having the knight on the edge of the board is bad. It usually is. I mean, it basically isn't that mobile there. So taking this knight here and from this relatively immobile h6 square and putting it instead on this very mobile f5 square is a big improvement in the value of your knight in this position. This is good for black. There's other considerations too. Basically pawn takes g5, and then knight to e5 becomes available. That's not particularly good for black. Your pawn structure also gets slightly worse this way. If pawn takes f6, this pawn structure is solid, and you also have an open g file to attack the king with. So that's all good stuff. So I think knight f5, straightforwardly improves your knight. I think that's really a good thing, and from here it has many different future opportunities. That's just a good place for the knight to be. Put the knight there, and then you're in good shape. F takes allows knight to e5. Now the knight moves to f5, which is still a good outpost, by the way. It's fine. It's fine here. You've gone through a move sequence which has made the overall board a little bit not less good. I mean, you traded your bishop for that knight, but the knight's still strong on f5, and as a result, you still have a superior position and good attacking chances. Now, from a strategic perspective, I think what you want to do is you want to break open the king side. Basically use your rooks and your knight and your queen to try to create a lot of attacking chances on the king side here. Knight takes d5, and I would say rook takes d5 here is probably good. I think rook takes, and you're sort of covered. White's not going to win a piece or anything. Pawn takes f5 does lose the piece and loses it with the check from white. It also, also knight h4 doesn't really, knight h4 creates this issue with the queen. So after knight h5, queen fork. That's a rough game to lose, to be completely honest. I think you did a lot of things right. I think understanding the positional value of knight to f5 over knight on h6 is an important point. I think you can reason that out basically. I mean, from h6 it has 2 forward positions, but from f5 it has 4 forward positions, as well as knight d6, which could be kind of valuable. So knight f5 here was definitely an improvement. Basically here, the queen is, black is in good shape. I think knight takes, rook takes d5 should probably be recognizable as having value. That's sort of tricky, but I think rook takes d5 is good. And this ends up being kind of rough. I mean, basically I think black has some good ideas, and but rook takes d5 here is a tactical win. So yeah, I think Pravilo, you're at the same stage that many people are. I mean, a great majority of chess players are under 2,000, and I think the quickest return on time that you can see is just by doing tactical prep. I've made a list of resources of tactical prep on the Discord. I think that'll be helpful. But basically, there's a lot of available programs, some of them free, some of them not free, on the internet that can really be helpful in developing your tactical strategy. There's a reason why the emote that we have is tactics, and now I'm going to remember it's so the tactics, that emote is tactics, and then the other emote is we're going to add another emote, tempo. I like that because I say tempo a lot too, because tempo is another important concept. And we'll get an emote that says tempo. I like that idea. Jen is, we'll see what Jen thinks on that. But anyways, there's a tempo emote coming. Do you want to say hi, Jen?
I'm cooking. I'm about to work.
Just for a second.
Okay.
They're asking for you to be here.
It's Ophelia, my only
Yeah.
fan.
Jen is here. Jen is making dinner. But
Hi.
Jen was so nice to make the first emote. Maybe she'll make the second emote, and basically, we can make that part of the stream. I like the idea a lot for sure. So thank you for whoever came up with that. That's a good one. I like it a lot. Closing out the game, I think Pravilo, you're sending games that are very interesting. A lot of positional concepts in this one as well as tactical stuff. So I really like the game. I really appreciate it, and please keep sending games that contribute material to the stream. I think it's really interesting. And overall, really good games, guys. Please keep sending games. We have openings as early as May 14th. I think we can sort of wrap up a quicker night tonight. Excellent stuff, good games, and next stream is at 10 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning. Hope to see you there. Thank you all very much for being here, and have a good night. Thanks. Bye.